Where is he? Okay. Well, Claude's still not here, so let's go ahead and cover lesson 4 while I'm waiting. Okay, so we left off with shape and form. That is going to be what our lesson 4 covers is shape and form. So let's get started. So shape is when a line is enclosed and it is two-dimensional. So there's not a three-dimensional aspect to it. Shape is pretty easy to understand. We have two types of shape. We have organic and geometric shape. Our organic shape is often curving or round. I'm trying to get myself out of this little thingy right here. Hang on. Okay. Organic shape is often curved or round. It seems more relaxed and informal than geometric shape, and most shapes in nature are organic. So just think about it that way if it's confusing for you. Most oftentimes when you see an organic shape, it's something that occurs naturally in nature, whereas a geometric shape is precise and regular. Examples of geometric shape are circles, triangles, and squares. And it's often made with the help of tools such as rulers or compasses. And very rarely do we see geometric shapes existing in our natural world that are totally perfectly geometric that can be like measured with these tools that I mentioned with the rulers and compasses. Okay, our form is our height, width, and depth. So not only do we have the height and the width like we do a shape, or the height and the length like we do a shape, but we also have depth, which is that third element to it that makes it three-dimensional. Form is pretty easy to understand in sculpture work. So mass in 3 dimensions or form in 3 dimensions, which I use those words interchangeably. They are synonymous, but sometimes they're referred to as both are referred to when we're referring to this element of art. So those are one and the same. They're not two separate ones. Mass is a major element in sculpture and architecture. And essentially, it just means that there is that depth added to it. So all sculptural work, it's not just a flat two-dimensional piece, but it has that depth to it of a dimension. This is an important quiz question that you will see pop up. We have two types of form that we see. We have closed form, which this terracotta mask is an example of closed form because there's no space in between it, negative space that occurs other than the space that is around the shape in the form. Whereas open form is when that there is empty space surrounds the piece, but also moves through an open form, or the negative space of the open form creates a new sense of form. So this is an example of open form because we have those little places with the handles where negative space passes through the positive space. You'll see this in other examples as well, but this is a good example where there's two very similar objects, but one is open form and one is closed form. But essentially, it's when negative space exists and creates a new sense of form. But it's not just referring to the space that is simply around a sculptural piece. It has to go through the piece itself, like in this example. Mass in 2 dimensions, it's a little bit easier to comprehend because there's more elements that have to take place for you to understand that it's happening. So if you have mass in 2 dimensions, the shading will suggest that there are curving shapes, such as with the flowers and the fruits that we see here. So we start to see that there is a form or a 3-dimensional aspect to these pieces because of the shading and the color that is being used. It uses understanding of value and color theory to imply that there is mass there. So you have to have a good understanding, if you're an artist, of value and color to accurately display form in 2 dimensions, like this piece here. Okay, we also are covering space in this lesson as well. I didn't mention that in the beginning. So space is the distance between shapes and objects in either 2 or 3 dimensions, and it can exist in both. Space in 3 dimensions, we have, it's a little bit easier to comprehend, just like with form. We've got negative space and positive space in our 3 dimensions as well. Negative space is the space around the around and between the subjects of the artwork or of the image. And positive space is the subject of the artwork or the image. So this is a little bit of an unconventional piece, which is why I showed it, because it's, kind of something that's hard to understand, being as it's not a conventional artwork. This is a installation room by Doug Wheeler, and it is showing a lot of negative space. And Doug Wheeler actually relies on the audience members, so the people that are here that are interacting with the installation, to become his positive space. Without the people, there would just be negative space. There would be no point of focus or point of emphasis. It would just be like a subordinated area. But this figure here becomes positive space, like in juxtaposition with the very flat background. Okay. So space can also be implied, especially in 2 dimensions. So almost any mark on a picture plane begins to give that there is an illusion of depth, whether it's intentional or not. But you can use certain techniques to more so imply that there is like a sense of depth in the way that you want it to appear. So the viewer may be conscious of a picture's actual flat surface and the illusion of depth. The artist can emphasize either the reality or the illusion. So this kind of gives the artist a tool to make whatever they want, essentially. These are some techniques that you can use to imply that there is space when there is 2 dimensions. And this is just kind of like tricks that our brain automatically knows based on our interaction with our day-to-day life. So overlapping, for example, great way to show that there's a sense of depth happening. The one that's in the front that is not being like overlapped, but is the one that's overlapping others, is always going to seem like the one that's closest to us. Whereas the next one here is like second closest, and then the third one here is third closest. But nothing except for the overlapping is really different about these 3 shapes. They're all the same size circle, same line quality, all of that. It's just the overlapping that takes it to a better understanding of like the depth that's occurring. We see here there's overlapping and diminishing of size. So not only do we have this overlapping process, but the circles get smaller as it goes farther back, which is another way to imply that there's depth. The closer something is, the bigger it will appear. And the farther away it is, the smaller it'll appear. Vertical placement. This one's kind of a tricky one. Vertical placement is something that our line of vision naturally picks up on. So if we're looking at like a landscape, we'll see that the things at the bottom, which are like the grass and, just the ground below us, our feet, are always on the bottom of like our perspective. So, and then when I refer to a landscape, I just mean like any landscape, like you walk outside and you look at the trees. The second thing that will be like second closest to us is probably like the trees or, the mountains or whatever is kind of like second farthest away from us. And then lastly, our sky is like the third farthest away from us, and it's at the top of our like line of vision. So we see vertical placement existing almost everywhere in nature. The thing that's at the bottom of our line of vision will seem like it's the closest or will be the closest. And then as it gets higher and higher, it's farther and farther away. So we can use that in organizing our artwork as well. Even my painting that I have back here that, is where I was going to do my little yoga at, uses that principle as well. We see on the bottom there, that's what's closest to us. And then that's what's farthest away from us. And we just naturally pick up on that. And then this is an example of all those things interacting at once. And this is an example of a painting that is using that method to help organize their artwork and show a sense of depth. We see vertical placement happening here, and it almost vertical placement overpowers the overlapping here. So and the diminishing of size. So although the smallest objects here, there's still vertical placement happening. So it indicates that this is the thing that's closest to us because of the overlapping and the vertical placement that's taking place. But the diminishing of size is not conventional to what it normally is. Okay. Linear perspective. This one is going to be very important as we kind of progress through the class. Perspective, just in general, is very important to understand. It's any means of representing 3-dimensional objects in space on a two-dimensional surface. So this is primarily used for drawings and paintings. Linear perspective was perfected during the 15th century in Italy, and it's based on the way that we naturally see things. So although linear perspective was sort of founded in the Renaissance, like Italy times, it wasn't invented then. It was like always something that existed. It just needed to be like put a name to and, understood how to achieve and accomplish. With linear perspective, you have to have three things always. If you don't have these three things, then the perspective is not going to work. So the first thing is going to be the horizon line. And look at this little example up here in the A 1-point linear perspective. The horizon line we see right here, it's a horizontal line going from one edge to the other on the page. And it can be tall, like higher up, or it can be, lower at the bottom. Doesn't matter. It just has to be a horizontal line that goes the whole distance from like left to right side of the page. Our vanishing point, and we can have more than one vanishing point depending on what type of linear perspective we're using. We have 1-point, 2-point, 3-point, and you can guess if it's 2-point linear perspective, there's two vanishing points. And if there's 1-point linear perspective, there's one vanishing point. But 1-point perspective is what we'll talk about first. So in this example, there's one vanishing point, and it has to fall somewhere on the horizon line. And then lastly, our converging lines are the lines that all go to meet that point in space. So you can see here all of our objects and our lines in this example A here go towards the vanishing point. And a road is something that naturally has a vanishing point to it. So the next time that you're driving in your car, maybe just notice that, like, that point in space where like you can't see the road any longer if like you're on the highway. That's our vanishing point that it's naturally occurring there. Okay, so 1-point linear perspective, kind of going deeper into that, the vanishing point is always found on the horizon line, just always in general, and it can be in the middle, left, or right side. And then the converging lines all point to the vanishing point on the horizon line. This is a pretty well-known painting. It is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. And I like to use this one because especially in Renaissance paintings where linear perspective is like hyper used, it's used a lot of the time when it was invented. Linear perspective was used not only for like organizing the space and helping us understand that there's like a sense of depth happening, but also it connects to the meaning as well. So as we can see here, this is the Last Supper, which the story depicted is of Jesus holding a Last Supper for his disciples before his crucifixion the next day. And they are, it's just chaotic. It's crazy. They, are freaking out about it. They're arguing with one another about who is deceived Jesus, and you know how the story goes. But Jesus in this story is this figure of stability. He is this figure of like, bringing a sense of calmness and just a sense of realness to the story. And so in order to depict this message, Leonardo in one single frame shows all kinds of chaotic lines happening here and here. While Jesus is this figure of stability in the center, and his body actually creates a triangle, which not only is a shape that gives a sense of stability, but it also represents the Holy Trinity as well. In addition to that, linear perspective is used by making the vanishing point and the horizon line fall right here, where it's almost like a halo above Jesus. And then all of our converging lines all point back to Jesus. So that's like our point of focus in this piece, the point of emphasis using linear perspective. And so although this is just one still frame, Da Vinci is aware of how to, allude to the meaning of a story in that single frame using the elements of art. Okay, 2-point linear perspective, I won't touch much on it, but essentially it just means there's two vanishing points on the same horizon line. So, we have the horizon line right here, and we've got one vanishing point on one side and another vanishing point on the other side. And while at 1-point linear perspective, the idea is that they always go backwards in space, like with the road here, where everything recedes to a point in space. 2-point linear perspective, is when everything is coming towards you or the object's coming towards you. And you can see that in this drawing that we see here, where the house almost is like coming at you rather than receding away from you. Okay. And then lastly, atmospheric perspective. This is a non-linear way of showing the illusion of depth using color and focus and value. And you can also refer back to our previous slide for how to, convey a sense of atmospheric perspective using the overlapping and using the vertical placement and using the diminishing of sizes. Those are also techniques to create atmospheric perspective. This piece here, it's by Asher Brown's, it's Kindred Spirit, uses atmospheric perspective very well, using the, more muted colors in the background, more saturated colors in the foreground, darker values in the foreground, lighter values in the background, the sense of vertical placement, overlapping. There's lots of techniques being used here. A sense of like, more clarity in the foreground, more kind of fuzziness in the background. There's tons of ways to allude to this sense of atmospheric perspective that we can refer to here. Okay, so I'm going to come back in lesson 5 for value and color as well. So we will pick back up then, and hopefully this yoga thing goes along.